So welcome back to another episode of Lifesci AI, the podcast series. And before starting this episode, I want to highlight to everyone that's listening or watching this that in September, CyPro London will be running a marathon along with some of our teammates in the Munich office. We'll be running a marathon in Windsor in September to raise money this year for a WYSIBUG. WYSIBUGs are given to children with rare mobility restrictive diseases. So they normally cost around £5,000. So that's our aim this year, is to raise £5,000 like we did last year, so that we can donate that to Designability. And that money will go to fund a whole WYSIBUG to give to a child, to give them the independent mobility that every youngster really deserves. So I'll put a link for this in the LinkedIn post that we do for it, and in the email marketing that will go around as well, attached to the podcast. So any donations will be gladly received to that in due course, but probably closer to the time as well. But back to the podcast, and for the first time in this series, we have moved out of the UK. So we've gone global, but more European. And today we're joined by the CTO of Cerebriu, an innovative medical device company set up in Copenhagen. CTO and co-founder is Dr Akshay Pai. So welcome, Dr Akshay.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be on your podcast.
It's a pleasure's all mine. Pleasure's all mine. So please, for the listeners who haven't come across yourself before, just explain a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, okay. So as you said, my name is Akshay Pai. The last name is quite mathematical. It kind of suits the kind of work that I do. I am a computer scientist by background. I have a PhD in computer science, specializing in machine learning and medical imaging. My background is to use concepts from machine learning and apply them in real scenarios of medical imaging, more towards analysis of medical images like MRIs or ultrasounds or X-rays. And more specifically, I focus on automatic analysis of brain MRIs. My PhD was on analyzing brain MRIs and measuring something called as atrophy in brain with respect to Alzheimer's disease. And from there, I have sort of moved on towards a broader range of neurological diseases. Mm-hmm. And at Cerebriu, we are trying to apply all that knowledge that I've tried to acquire during my PhD and postdoc years and try to make a difference in the clinic.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. And it's interesting that we're focusing again on neuroimagery. Not the first episode to focus on this in the first series, but also you're not the first guest. You're looking at Dr. Mark Goldfinger perspective, who are looking at Alzheimer's disease as well, I believe, in their first iteration of AI research in life sciences. The first question I really have for yourself, Akshay, on your background. You were educated quite globally, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
You hopped around the world. So for everyone, just give us a rundown of where you were educated, and then what I'll be really interested to know in an ever increasing global world, what are the differences and what are the similarities that you faced or found in different educational systems?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have to start all the way from my schooling, but I'll start from my bachelor's.
No. Yeah.
So I did my bachelor's from a college called AMC in Bangalore, where I did my bachelor's in electronics and communication, which is sort of a broader engineering topic where we touch upon computer science and focus a lot on signal processing and the electronic part of it. And since post that, I went to the University of Texas at El Paso to do my master's again in electrical and electronics, but with a specialization in medical image analysis.
Right, I see.
It is there where I actually decided to work on medical images. This was back in 2008, and since then I've actually not looked back. My first research topic was using ultra wideband microwaves for detecting breast cancer.
Right.
And that kind of inspired me into continuing to work in this space. Then I briefly worked for GE as a consultant, where I worked a lot on spine image analysis together with Vivek Vaid there. It was a very enriching experience. And I think that is where I realized that I need more depth
right.
from a computer science and machine learning point of view, from the theoretical side of things, because you need to understand the essence of mathematics before you can actually start innovating, right? So then I decided to do my PhD and was looking for opportunities, and I came across an opportunity under Dr. Mads Nielsen, and Dr. Mads Nielsen is like one of the best machine learning researchers out there in the space of medical image analysis. And then it was a no-brainer for me to join University of Copenhagen. In terms of similarities and differences, there's actually it's a contrast between India and Denmark and US. I would say from a work style perspective, India and US is more close than India and Denmark. In India and US, there's more focus on quantity of work, whereas in Denmark, I would say it's closer to quality and with a significant focus on your work-life balance.
Right, I see.
Which is kind of surprising as a PhD student to come across, because for a PhD student, work-life balance is actually unheard of. What is work-life
60
balance?
hours a week, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. But when I came to Denmark and I was, working a bit too much, then people kind of, pushed me towards, taking breaks and making sure that I kept my mind fresh. And I think this is why Danes are so efficient in what they do. So that's kind of a summary of my background.
I see. So just before going to the importance potentially then of work-life balance and how it affects you and how you manage that still as a CTO, just wanted to, probably not quickly, I'll probably have to go into some depth in this, but you mentioned about it's important to have an understanding of mathematics before you even go into development. And interestingly, I've been speaking with people in the UK about this and the importance of coming from a mathematical or statistical background, and young researchers needing that foundation, especially when in deep learning and machine learning, because it's you understand it and you can take a concept and you can adapt it and evolve it and implement it into different sectors. It's not a cut and paste job. It's more of I understand it from its foundational point of view. So what importance do you put on mathematical understanding for development, and why from yourself? It'd be good to know why that's important.
Yeah, so I think if you want to excel in creating disruptive solutions, it's extremely important to get the fundamentals right. And mathematics is one of the most fundamental sciences, right? And it has direct connections with computer science. Of course, computer science is basically mathematics in the end of the day. So in order to solve problems, you need to know concepts that are applicable to solve certain problems.
Right.
And what in this world, you see, with things moving around so much, with so many resources available, it's very easy for people to just apply things and just be and engineer things around what is available. So people tend to focus less on stepping back a little bit and fundamentally re-looking at the problem. This is where companies like Tesla and and Lucid are making a difference, is because they're going back and fundamentally changing things from ground up. And in order to do that, you need to understand the most basic concepts. And these are not new concepts. These concepts, like for instance, neural networks, right? They have been around for ages. You have to go back and understand really what was the reason why neural networks were developed, and the mathematics around it, and get a sense of it for you to adapt and change. Right, and add your own flavor to it afterwards. But if you're not fundamentally strong, it becomes very hard to innovate. So it's extremely important for people who are going into machine learning research is to make sure that you have your fundamentals in spaces of differential geometry, linear algebra, functional analysis to be extremely strong before you really dive deep into advanced topics like deep learning.
Yeah, for sure. So that was linear algebra.
Differential geometry.
Differential geometry.
Yeah, and concepts like these are extremely important.
Okay. Just because I don't know if it's the feedback I've been having then of people like similar in positions to you, that some people the talents coming through now and the cohorts coming through now are lacking sometimes in that area. Do you think there's been a change in the education systems? Have you noticed that also, or that there isn't as strong a foundation in mathematics?
I don't think the education system hasn't changed so much. It is more the availability of media, right? The availability of spotlight. You see 20-year-old people starting companies and becoming millionaires because they implemented a seriously nice face filter or something like that. And I think it's that's something that kind of draws people into more application than really fundamentally questioning the whole the science. I mean, I'm not saying that applications are wrong, but in order for the world to move in the right direction, you need a substantial number of people to look at the fundamental problems that we have. Like for instance, deep learning itself, people think that it is drawn by brain biology, but it's really not. So you have to go back and really understand how brain works, and try to model that. And it just doesn't happen overnight, right? So I don't think so the fundamental education system has changed. It's just everything around it.
Right, I see.
It's the glamorization of science that has completely made people move towards application than really focus on the fundamentals. And I am a culprit of it as well. I mean, I don't have a pure mathematical background, but in hindsight, I wish I had that.
Yeah, I see. So less what you would like to see is less than a focus on the actual application or the end, but more of a focus on the means.
Yes, precisely.
Can you deconstruct the means? And that's almost the most important piece, but there's too many people focusing on the end and then skipping the means part.
I mean, like for instance, deep learning, right? People know that there's convolutional neural networks, but I think it would be nice for people to understand how did convolutional neural networks come to being, right? Why is it playing such an important role in machine learning these days? I think that would be interesting to have.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And you have a second piece you mentioned there is a work-life balance difference. So just before we get into really the products of Cerebriu, it'd be interesting to know, as a CTO, how do you keep a work-life balance?
Good question. Well, I mean, it helps me that my co-founders and the people I'm surrounded by are people who put a lot of stress on keeping a fresh mind and keeping a good work-life balance. That kind of helps. If you're surrounded by people who are working all the time, and then you kind of peer pressured into doing it, right? So I think credit should go where it's due. My co-founders are extremely good at making sure that they shield me from working too hard and stressing myself too much. Um, yeah, so it keeps my mind fresh. It lets me innovate more. It lets me use my time much more efficiently than I would usually do if I just worked 70-80 hours a week.
Yeah,
So it's important to take breaks. I mean, not just for startups, but any
for anyone.
any field, anyone.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. So, if it as you guys scale now, do you think that this is something you're going to have implemented throughout the business in terms of there's going to be pretty hard and fast rules on this? Because, for example, what if you have a really enthused person that wants to work 60 hours a week, 65, 70 hours a week, long term? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. Quality is important. Quantity is not. Right? As long as somebody produces the quality and innovates and makes a difference in the company, it doesn't matter if it's 10 hours they put in a week or 40 hours they put in a week. But if people want to work 60 hours, of course they have the luxury to do it, but we will make all the tools available for them to take breaks. And we have social gatherings where we sort of push them into it and say, you know what, take a break and have a good time, and you can always come back and work.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good to hear. Okay, so Cerebriu then, you joined as a co-founder, right?
Yeah, so I've been one of the founding people of Cerebriu. Been there since day one.
What was the story of you joining? Or what was the sort of the conception story?
So biomedic. So biomedic, it was actually, we should step back. I was a part of a company called Biomedic, and we were focusing on neurodegeneration disease. And at that point, I was a PhD. I was a postdoc, and I had a discussion with Dr. Matt Nielsen, who was the CEO of Biomedic, who's the co-founder of Cerebriu. So at that point, we sort of made a conscious decision saying that we wanted to make a difference in real clinics.
Right.
And we wanted to reach the people's lives. And working on Alzheimer's is extremely gratifying because it's a real problem that is facing the world right now. But we wanted to go a step further and actually make a difference in the clinics. And at that point, we decided that we should form a separate company, and we decided on forming Cerebriu. And Mats and Robert Lauritsen, who were good friends, came together. And Robert has this extremely impressive background in implementing healthcare solutions.
Yeah, for sure.
So for me, it was a great mix of academical background, practical knowledge, and innovation to join Cerebriu and sort of create this company that can transform radiology, disrupt radiology, and sort of bring in new perspectives. But this is interesting. So we thought that, okay, we will start with the dementia product because we've all had dementia background. And then we visited India. And we had a session with a bunch of radiologists. And the radiologist said that really dementia is a problem, yes, but unfortunately there's no solution to dementia, right? The problem for them was more in the routine clinic, where they were burdened with too many images coming through them, too many disruptions. It was just hard for them to keep up with the burden. And we turned the problem statement around, and I think this is how companies should work. You have to look at the problem first, not solution, and then try to find a problem that fits the solution, right? So what we did was we turned the table around and asked them, what is your biggest pain point? And the biggest pain point they had was that they essentially said that they were getting too many images on their desk.
Right.
If there was a way to filter that and they could focus on only the most important and the most critical images, first and
Right.
then look at the rest. Then
Yeah.
that would significantly reduce the burden.
I see. Okay.
And
So,
I think that
well,
was,
I just going to ask on the images point of view, do you mean in terms of number of patients, or do you mean in terms of number of images per patient?
I think it's if you give me a second, I have to.
No worries, we've got some lighting problems.
Yeah, the sun.
Beating down the sun in Copenhagen,
Yeah.
it
Maybe
is.
this is better. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, it is both. It is both the
Okay.
number of patients that they have to look at, and each patient, the data is exponentially increasing. I mean, there are a lot of companies coming up like Subtle Medical or even GE that is acquiring faster and faster scans, which means more patients are going through the system. But it is not fundamentally changing the problem that just too many images are going to the radiologist, and not everything is clinically relevant. So we tried to turn the problem around, and I'm so happy that this epiphany happened in India, because it's a country that I'm from. We turned the solution around to say that why don't we build a solution that can make sure that the right data goes to the doctor at the right time and the right treatment is given to the patient. That's how Cerebriu actually started.
Yeah. So you identified the bottleneck, and your aim is to release the bottleneck and to make it efficient. So how are you going about doing that?
So we have a patent pending technology called Smart Protocol. And we are focusing on brain imaging, because neuroimaging is one of the most extensive imaging suite that is available. Patients typically spend a lot of time for brain imaging, somewhere between 15 to 45 minutes in a scanner, which is crazy, right? What Smart Protocol does is that while the patient is in the scanner and while the scans are being acquired, we analyze the scans in real time, and then give a proper pathway for new scans to be acquired. So essentially what happens is we let the technician acquire a few basic sequences, very few basic sequences, and based on that, recommend what needs to be acquired next based on what the machine learning algorithm sees in the brain. If it turns out that there's nothing in the brain, there's an opportunity for the radiographer or the radiologist to cut short and save a lot of time and a lot of data going down to the radiologist. Right? So that is how we are prioritizing. Yeah.
So once they're in a scan and the first pictures are being created, it goes into the Cerebriu workflow, and then from that you utilize machine learning to suggest the likelihood of different areas that maybe need to be checked second or third or fourth, or just to stop the scan right now, it's fine. And then the technician can go to the next scan of priority, rather than almost scanning everything for 45 minutes and then checking things you don't need to bother checking.
Absolutely. Like for instance, you can look at some cases where some parts of the world where the contrast is injected into the body regardless of what the scan is about, right? And that's unnecessary use of resources, unnecessary use of time, and we want to cut that short. One of the first applications that we are trying to bring out is in the space of stroke. And one of the reasons why MRI is not used in stroke is because it takes a lot of time to acquire the scan. So what we are coming up is saying that you acquire an ultra short protocol. We will give you a decision in terms of not a recommendation in terms of which patient is more qualified for the thrombectomy within the first 10 minutes or even within the first 5 minutes of the scan. And for the rest of the patients, which is probably more than half of the patients who come with a stroke symptom, can just be sent home saying that you're fine.
I see. So you can have, I see. So because the problem right now, really, like you said, if you go in an MRI, 45 minutes, is it the electrodes in the brain that they go dormant? within a stroke?
Just because there's a stroke, there's embolism, cells start to die, right? So minutes are very, very important.
Yeah.
If you've seen studies that show that both CT and MRI almost take the same time. The most of the time is actually placing the patient into the scanner, but there is a lot more optimization room as far as MRI is concerned, is because MRI is a superior imaging technology. And you can see a lot more in the brain and make the neurologist or the neuroradiologist usually feel more confident if you have a diagnosis based on MRI. And what Apollo is doing is that it's looking at the first couple of sequences, really short sequences, and then immediately deciding whether this patient is eligible for any further treatment.
I see.
So that's how we are approaching the problem.
Awesome, brilliant. Okay, and you said sort of make it sound like magic. Machine learning does its thing, and then it happens. It's given a result. So, if you can, without going into as much detail as possibly giving away all your secrets, but what sort of machine learning approaches are you utilizing there, and where did they come from?
So primarily, we are a deep learning based company. There is no way there's no way around deep learning right now, because that is the most well-performing tech tool out there. So we are using a mixture of deep learning and traditional machine learning, putting them together to build these tools. A lot of our effort actually goes into understanding the domain itself, how the images are created, what kind of artifacts can we see in the scanner, trying to simulate those artifacts, and then making sure that the network or the model is robust to these artifacts. A lot of our work actually goes there than the classification part of it. So it's more the data that goes into the machine learning model. That's where we spend most of our effort in.
I see. Okay. And what's the relationship with the hardware?
You mean the scanner, or?
Yeah. So if are you guys a software only company, or do you have quite a good relation, or do you embed this into the scanners themselves? And if so, what are the limitations that you found with utilizing deep learning? Obviously, a heck of a lot of data, right? So if there's been any restrictions or any challenges that you found there in making it relatable to hardware and talk together? Yeah,
so one of the biggest challenges we've seen is that deep learning is it used to be a kind of, it kind of still is, I would say, a very data hungry system. The more data you provide, the better the system is. The more variance in data, the better the system is. But there are a lot of methods that are coming in right now, like equivariance and all these things, that sort of model inductive biases that you need so that the model can be more robust. And so we are moving more towards the less and less requirement of data. But having said that, MRI scanners are scanners, unlike CT, with a lot of degrees of freedom. And every scanner, every center have their own little idiosyncrasies on how to operate the scanner. All right. So that variation is quite immense. Quite immense. And this is where data becomes extremely important for us, because we need to understand what variation exists out there and try to account that in our models.
I see.
This is where I think scanner vendors can help us a lot. Both from building the model perspective, but imagine having an alert system on the scanner itself. At this point, we are sitting separately somewhere else, and there needs to be a third screen that is sitting right next to the scanner.
I see.
Imagine being embedded on the scanner itself. Integrated on the scanner itself, that as and when you take acquire a sequence, there is an alert saying what needs to be done next. Companies like GE are moving towards that. They have this very nice embedded pneumothorax notification system that that essentially notifies if there is lung collapse right on the scanner on their mobile X-rays, which is what we should move towards for MRI is concerned. So That's the future.
That's the future. Yeah.
And
Do,
MRI vendors are actually moving there. They're
yeah.
creating their own
Do you
ecosystems.
think that then that you could get to a point where the MRI scanner does it all itself?
Yeah. So yes, I think that is where the whole MR system is moving towards. They are moving towards more being autonomous, where you just walk in and then there is a radiographer, but only purely for the human contact, and the machine does everything else. The machine positions itself, and it decides what sequences have to be acquired based on clinical history, referrals from the clinician, and then basically acquires images that are the most essential.
Definitely.
I think that is where the world is moving towards, and as Cerebriu, we would like to be that company that drives this change.
Yeah, for sure. And where would you see Cerebriu coming into them? Would you be partnering with some of these MRI vendors, or do you think eventually you would be? I know it's probably a lot of capital would be needed, right, to create an MRI scanner. But you talked at the start about innovation being from the ground up and understanding the fundamentals, and that's when you can really make disruptive change. You talked about Tesla. There's talk about Apple doing their own autonomous car, but they don't want to buy Ford because that would be top down, and they don't want to do that. Yeah. So, would you consider that at Cerebriu, or would you partner with somebody to do that? How do you see yourself coming into that innovation piece?
Good question. I mean, if there is capital, then we would definitely, at least personally, I would look at rebuilding MR machines. Like Hyperfine has done. They've just completely turned the MR space around, and now they have systems that can sit in the corner of your desk, and then you can just scan yourself whenever you want. And you get an MR scanner out. So potentially a combination of hardware and advanced machine learning is where Cerebriu is going to go. But I would say we would be probably more towards machine learning in the shorter future. And in the longer future, it would be in collaboration with one of those existing scanner vendors. But if we do raise a lot of capital, then building our own MR scanners might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And so as a CTO then, actually, there's a lot of, we talked about the deep learning focus that you guys have and the freedoms that an MRI scanner actually gives you compared to other devices, other scanning devices. How do you make decisions as a CTO?
So technology decisions are sort of made. So we have a chief scientific officer in Dr. Matt Nielsen, and usually there's a lot of ideas that comes from the research team, right? Somebody has to filter it. So usually I'm the one who filters those ideas and then proposes it to our chief scientific officer, and then we sit down and actually brainstorm from a technology point of view what needs to be done next. But from an application point of view, it is purely driven by the need. And this is where Dr. Amir, who is our new CMO, plays an extremely significant role in translating the needs of a clinic into language that people like me who are non-radiologists can understand. It's a mountain. The radiology system is a mountain to change. I mean, we can't just completely change. So we have to find smaller milestones, smaller achievable pieces that can incrementally start transforming radiology. And that steps are really hard to envision until you are the end user. So from a clinical point of view, it is me together with our CEO or CSO and Dr. Amir. We sit together and try to really understand the clinical scenarios, the needs, and the parameters surrounding the healthcare to decide what's the next step.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And I was going to maybe do a bit more of a spotlight on this, on your new CMO, Um,
I think it
sort of-
deserves it.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And I remember speaking with Robert at the start of February, and he was sort of saying we've got this big announcement in the pipeline and such. So, just actually in a bit more depth, if possible, what is the impact going to be of Dr. Amir, and how do you see that changing or accelerating your development in the next 12, 24, 36 months?
I think he's the singularly the most best thing that has happened to us in this year. It's because he brings so much of insight into how a clinic works, what the biology is, how a radiologist or a neuroradiologist would treat a particular case, right? Usually Amin and I sit down and we go through scenarios where he explains to me if a patient comes in with a certain conditions, what would they like to ideally do with the patient?
Yeah.
And once I know what needs to be done manually, then I figure out what of it can be automated.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is where Amin plays a significantly important role.
Yeah.
But on the other end of the spectrum, we are looking at the development end of the spectrum, right? Let's say post-product end of the spectrum. He is just the right person to speak the radiology language.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
To the customers and tell people why is it that we are innovating? Why is there a need for innovation?
Yeah.
And if he comes and being, I think he was one of the top 25 opinion leaders in space of radiology in India this year. If he speaks up and says that this is the technology that is going to transform your MRI care, then I think that adds a lot of value, more than me, an obscure machine learning researcher, shouting out, saying that, guys, have a look.
Yeah, I wouldn't describe you as obscure. But no, it's important, because I think more than any other industry, life sciences needs that intermediary between the clinic and the AI.
Absolutely.
If you look at autonomous driving, it's a little bit different, and robotics a little bit different, because they're almost a thing inside of the industry. So you kind of need that intermediary, and it sounds like it will be a game changer for you guys, and I'm super excited to see the impacts of that in the coming months and years. But just before we close, I just wanted to get your thoughts down on the next steps for Cerebriu in terms of, I mean, we've already discussed about maybe creating a full MRI scanner as a potential, but where can this technology go in terms of being transferred into different areas of body scanning, or different ideas away from not just doing stroke into different diagnostic pieces as well? Yeah,
so what we want to do is we want to automate MRI, brain MRI acquisition, right? So we are starting with stroke as a small use case scenario.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of other neuroradiological conditions that can do with smart protocoling. Like, as I said, the use of gadolinium in the context of tumor can be much more smartly done, where you don't just give gadolinium to anyone with a suspected tumor, but have a machine learning algorithm recommend whether a gadolinium is required or not.
Yeah.
And most often, ruling out things that are causing headaches. Most of the MRI recommendations in the routine clinic are because of headaches. People don't know why is there a headache, right?
Yeah.
And that could be because of a gazillion reasons, right?
Yeah.
So if a machine learning can filter out cases based on what it sees and sends the right images to the radiologist, then I think we would make a big difference. And that is where Cerebriu is headed towards. It is trying to reduce the number of images that go to a radiologist, and thereby just make sure that the patient spends less and less time in the scanner. And whatever decisions are made purely based on evidence that is generated in the scanner.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what would you reckon the challenges though would be, now you've got where you are at the moment with stroke, not with stroke, sorry. Yeah, it's stroke, isn't it? Yeah, sorry. Yes. You got where you are with stroke. Moving to another area, what do you think the challenges would be that you would face that you can see before even starting, perhaps?
Yeah, so stroke is a hard space, but the number of possibilities that you can see from pathological variations, that is quite limited. It's not a lot. But when it comes to other areas like tumors, for instance, right? The manifestation of tumors in the brain can happen in a gazillion different ways. Right? It's not just within the brain, but it could be something on the skull or something closer to your ear. It doesn't necessarily have to be intracranial, it could be intraparenchymal. Those variations and trying to understand those variations is the biggest challenge that we have right now. And I'm pretty sure with Dr. Amin's help, we will get there.
Yeah.
But so handling this variation, pathological variation on top of scanner variation, which complicates things even further.
Just so many variables.
Yes, precisely. That is going to be a challenge, and this is why you see so few players in the space of MRI, because it's and even if there are players in the space of MRI, they are in very niche areas like lesion, white matter lesion segmentation, or mostly dementia, atrophy, because they are very specific areas. And if you start looking at other real areas, the variation is incredible. Incredible. Yeah. But that's a challenge, I like challenges. So that's where Cerebriu is going to stand out.
Yeah. I guess anyone with a good mathematical foundation will do well then.
Yeah,
that's the key.
Absolutely.
That's the key.
Fortunately, we have the right people like maths.
Yeah, for sure.
Who are really brilliant in this space.
Yeah, and it's always really pleasant to see when there has been a researcher that has had such an impact, not just directly themselves, but on other people's growth, and then has created like a cohort of people, and either underneath them or on par with them now, to create a wider impact on it, which is great to see. And the impact of Mads Nielsen in Copenhagen will probably be long lasting, right?
Yes, absolutely. He has created some great researchers. Some of them have gone on to make some good companies.
Yes.
So
for sure.
I think he's had his hand in that.
For sure. Well, look, thank you very much for your time, Dr. Akshay. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yes, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for listening as well and watching, guys. I guess we'll be back in a couple of weeks and with another episode. Please don't forget about the marathon that I myself and my team will be running. There'll be lots more about that going out via email and LinkedIn, and I'll be speaking about that in a bit more detail throughout the year to try and get our goal of raising £5,000 to give a witty bug to a young child towards the end of the year. But thank you very much for listening.